Hi guys, and welcome back to day 28 of Inktober. So just a quick reminder, I do have a Kickstarter for my Inktober book, which is called LUMINA, and there's a link in the description, so if you'd like to own a copy for yourself, it is down there. I also have the shop link down there, which also takes you to where you can get the original of this piece today. And I also have all the tools and everything that I use down in the description as well. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. So today it's a pretty simple design. It's just a character portrait, but there was an element of design that I had in my piece from yesterday that just didn't quite make the final cut, but I knew I wanted to try it out and see if I could get it to work the way I wanted to and explore it. And ultimately, yesterday, I just had a lot of design elements already going on that I didn't need it, and it was kind of a secondary read, something that was happening in the background, and there wasn't a ton of background space to begin with, so I didn't really feel like it was a necessary component to really finish that piece off. So I decided to cut it from that and then bring it over to today, and where I can just focus on it and see what I can do with it. So what that design element was is just a circle or a moon type shape with these hatch marks, I guess you could call it, coming and radiating out from the moon in the background. And I really like the effect in this sketch, but I don't think that the way that I applied it in this final piece quite had as much dynamic energy as I wanted it to. So I don't think this is the be all end all of me trying it out, but I do like the effect of what I got in this one, and it is different, which I'm okay with. It's just, it was a really fun experiment as far as working with textures and a new way to enhance a background, because that's what I'm really looking for. Is I like to find ways that I can make pieces more interesting for both me and the viewer without necessarily always needing it to be something that's very time consuming. I love finding design elements to just add interest to it, but it's just really easy and not tedious for me to be able to bring into the piece. But I'll talk a little bit more about how I actually applied that when I finally get to that point on this piece. But for the portrait, since it was very simple, like I mentioned, I wanted to focus on a couple details that would really be enjoyable for me to put into this piece and add more of a story to the character. So ultimately I went with this moon and a star on her forehead that's stitched on almost, or almost like it's a wound that's stitched up and it's still in the shape of a moon. I really love doing stitches and these injuries on faces. I love doing them. So it was really fun to be able to do it in a very specific shape. But I also wanted to continue the stitched up design element throughout her face, so I also included it around her mouth as well, stitching her mouth shut. And that's one of the things that really makes a much better design, I should say, is when you find ways to bring a design element throughout a piece so that it really feels harmonious and it has these ties that remind from different places within the piece. So I love being able to work through a design and figuring out how I can mimic that same look or reapply a design element so that it does look like a character that it would exist and then would have these similar details throughout. Okay, so when it came to doing the radiating pattern in the background, I knew that I had to really rein in my impatience. I did a quick little test on a side piece of paper to see exactly how I'd enact it and how it would look. And even in just that little tiny swatch, I was already rushing and I was overlapping the little marks and I was making them curve in a certain way. So immediately it was obvious that I needed to really just slow down and pay attention to being able to get consistency in the way that I was creating these marks. I find that a lot of times when I do something very repetitive like this, I sometimes lose focus of how I began designing it or began creating those shapes. So I wanted to make sure that I still was very continuous throughout creating these little marks. A lot of times I'll do something like this, and then as I go on, the marks would get longer or they'd start to curve or the spacing between them would change. So that's something that I'm really trying to pay closer attention to, because it can really make or break a pattern. When it just starts not having that continuous look, it really starts falling apart. So I had to really rein it in and make sure that I was controlling how I was doing it. I did let myself have variation in certain things. So I had variation in thickness as well as the length to a certain degree, but I made sure that it was very straight and they weren't curving. And I was paying attention to how I was mixing thicker and thinner lines and shorter and longer lines. So it was all just kind of like a puzzle work where I was building it together. I did go in a little bit in advance before I really started filling in a section, and I put in a couple strokes just to make sure that I kept the radiating circular shape that I needed, so I wouldn't start going too flat around a curve, if that makes sense. I wanted it to look like it's all radiating from the center point of the circle, and that really did help when I went in and added a couple ticks in that bigger space and built around it. That is, it just gave it a little bit of structure to it, so when I was looking at it, I could easily see what I needed to shape around it, and that actually worked pretty well. It helped me not get too speedy, too thoughtless when I was working on this. But ultimately, the design for the background compared to the design in the sketch, the way that it differed is the finished version of this is a lot more subtle, so it's a little bit more of a texture and a second read. Whereas in the sketch, I had the line work that was a lot more thick and dark and dynamic, and it just really had a very strong focus to it. So it wasn't so secondary, and it was a lot more directional in the way that it made the viewer look at the piece. So I would really like to retry this kind of a technique to get something that's a little bit more on the nose, on the dot with how it makes the viewer look at it. So yeah, I am happy with this one, though. It is a lot more subtle, and it's a little bit more of a second read, which I do like, and I do think that it adds to my arsenal of how I can deal with certain shapes and certain things that I want to give a little bit more emphasis to and shape without necessarily making it very obvious to the viewer. And that is it for today. Like I mentioned, there's all those links down in the description, so if you'd like to help support me or this channel, there are some great ways to do that down there. And I do post daily Inktober videos, so I'll be back tomorrow with another one, and I think that's about it for today. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.